And this kind of leads me to this last question, which is, I think, one that just is always relevant for a team like this, because I think when you enter this season, everyone's saying, well, let's temper expectations because Jordan Love's a new quarterback. But it's like, wait a second, Aaron was a new quarterback at some point. Brett was. You have a team in place that, while it is the youngest team in the National Football League at the time with Bakhtiari before he got injured, you have guys at key positions. Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary is an up-and-coming star. Devondre Campbell, although he's been hurt. You have guys, 7, 8 picks on first-round draft picks on defense. You have guys that make you think that this team can be a very competitive team. Maybe not a Super Bowl winning team, but I think at the beginning of the season, the outlook was pretty bright. I'm not saying that's at all. What I guess I'm saying is, right now, when you look at the manner in which we've lost a couple of these games, it makes you scratch your head. And maybe this is a rebuilding team. And so if this is a rebuild, like, it's very easy to draw that conclusion. New quarterback, second-year receivers, first-year tight ends. Like, a lot of stuff has to happen right on offense. You got your best player on defense saying, we know defensively we can't give up touchdowns. We might have to score in order for this team to win right now because the offense doesn't have their mojo figured out. Paraphrasing. Is this the right staff for a rebuild? Because not every staff is meant for a rebuild. Not every staff has the patience, has the ability to teach, to develop, that is required to have a rebuild. Some coaches are working kind of with a lot of end game knowledge, so a lot of down the road knowledge. I know how to. I can't personally coach 8-year-olds in football. I would be terrible. Like, the language thing wouldn't work. We would have fun, but we would lose every game. And at 12, they'd be amazing, but the parents would hate me at 8, 9, and 10 because I'd run boring plays and I just make sure they're really good at stuff. And then when they got really good at stuff, and you started running exciting plays because they're good enough to run them now, then they would see. I think in my mind they would be much better, but it would be like this really tough period. A lot of coaches are like, I can put the finishing touches on these high-profile players, but I don't know if at the individual coaching level, can I go through like developing this team, given the circumstances that are surrounding us, given the time that we have with the team, given the priorities that the head coach, the coordinators, offensive, defensive, special teams have with how they want to use that time. Like, is that what's interesting to me? Or is what's interesting to me is like, I'm the OC, I want to beat the DC on the other team with like how smart I am as a play caller. And the truth is, this team has really never needed to draft and develop. Like, we talked about, the Green Bay Packers is a draft and develop team. But when you have Aaron Rodgers, your window, the Super Bowl window, is until he leaves. You won a Super Bowl like over 10 years ago. And every single year that he's been here, there's been this sense that, okay, we're a Super Bowl caliber team. And we've always said this is such a great place to draft and develop. And they have developed, they've developed great offensive linemen, first and foremost. Bakhtiari, Corey Linsley, Josh Sitton, TJ Lang, Brian Balog. I mean, they've drafted some dudes that can play. Chad, Marco, Tausch, Flanny. Guys that can all play at a high level. The relationship, the relationship, the work ethic, the draft, everything with Aaron has developed some incredible wide receivers. Brett before him, Donald, Jordy, Greg, Devontae, James Jones, dudes, all dudes. When I got drafted here, Mike Holmgren had a staff of Andy Reid is a teacher. Okay? Like, I think Mike was literally a teacher. They were developing talent because they didn't have Brett. But that's how they thought about things. Brett helped develop Aaron. I don't know how much Aaron helped develop Jordan. I think it was the same idea that watch how I'm doing things, and that helps a lot. But those, like Brett, Aaron, Maybe Jordan, we don't know. Those guys are different, man. I mean, they're just you you could never imagine that Aaron Rodgers is going to be Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he did, but I don't think anybody else did. I mean, to be one of the Mount Rushmore quarterbacks, arguably, you just never know. It's like Tom Brady. You could put Tom Brady in any situation. You just feel like Tom Brady was going to be Tom Brady. Mike McCarthy was an old school. Like some people like Mike, some people don't. Everyone's grateful they gave him a Super Bowl. Mike McCarthy was an old school football coach, meaning to me, when I say old school, he coached hard. He demanded a huge amount of attention to detail at the individual level. Now, I'm not talking about game management, Mike. What about his game management? Okay. What I'm talking about is the expectations for performance at the offensive line, at the defensive line, at the way you went about your positional requirements of the linebacker position, the running back position. His staff and his coaching staff demanded, from a technical perspective, from an IQ perspective, a lot out of those players. And we always say it was different back then. It was a little bit different back then. The way that we went about business was a little bit different. And I do think with guys like Mike, with guys like Mike Holmgren, Mike McCarthy, Mike Sherman, there's just a level of teaching that went on that is different than a lot of guys in the league now. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. There's a lot of things that play into that. It doesn't make these people better or worse. It's just a different time, a different era. But when things aren't going great and you see people getting beat individually and you realize that they're not necessarily working a lot on their individual confrontations, well, then you start thinking, well, maybe that's something that we need to work on a little bit more. Now, the chances are that this staff, as it's constructed right now, Joe Barry, obviously Coach LaFleur, running the offense, Joe Barry running the defense, everybody they have underneath them. The chances are they can develop these young, talented players into a cohesive unit. What's making the transition more difficult is maybe a lack of veteran leadership at key positions, because there's this book, Captain's Class. I forgot who wrote it. It's a great book, and he talks about water carriers, like the best captains, the best teams in the world over all sports had these people. They called them water carriers, and they basically they do what is required to make that team good. Sometimes it's the captain, sometimes it's not. These guys for the last 10 years have had players like Marcedes Lewis. They've had, Alan Lazard, who was one of the best run blocking, run enhancing wide receivers in the game. Za'Darius changed the culture of that locker room the first year he was there. We could talk about the other years, but the first year Za'Darius Smith was there, he was arguably the person most responsible for the turnaround of this team. Not the coaching staff, not Aaron. When I talked to dudes in that locker room, Za'Darius Smith was as responsible as anybody in that building for turning that team around. Adrian Amos is there. I mean, you have guys that are leaders that have left. There's gone. And there's a gap between this, what young players are learning from coaching, what young players, and very, very young players in some of these positions that are important to success, what they're learning from experience, and then what they can learn from vets. There's this old saying, the wise old man saying, who wants to learn from my own failures when I can learn from somebody else's, right? Like, why do I need to break my back to make that mistake if I can learn it from a vet? So there's this gap when you're a young player and you're coming in, you're going to learn X amount from the coaching staff. I had Tom Lovat my first year. Tom Lovat told me, hey, listen, Mike Holmgren said, you're not, we've told the story. I held out. He was angry, told me I wasn't going to play. Tom comes over and says, listen, this is how it is. I got to coach the players going to play. Mike's not playing you this year. Good luck. We'll kind of get back with you next year. If Jeff Dellenbach isn't and Frankie aren't there, Frankie is taking care of the ones, but I just am watching him because he's so, Frank Winter is such an intriguing character. But then Jeff Dellenbach's not there. I don't know what I learned, right? So you learn from so much from these veteran players. because then you have to, you build up your experience and practice for say, but some of these guys are thrust into the game immediately. So that learning curve is different. But my point is the amount of information you can gather in that room. Davante Adams is in that room. These guys are accelerating their learning curve because they have Davante, right? Randall Cobb, Allen Lazard. That's why they kept him last year. Mercedes Lewis is in the tight end room right now. Even if he doesn't take a rep, these guys are probably better than they are because of the professionalism that he goes about his business with, because his expertise in the areas of like blocking, for example, like the nuances, the intimate details of doing that. They're going to be better at it because they're going to have him. And so you don't have a lot of that. And so when you ask the question, is this the right staff for the rebuild? Yeah, it probably is. But as I said at the beginning, your perspective of time has to change. And from an organization standpoint, from a fan base, everybody has to be okay with that. Like, I need to be able to go in and say, I'm going to get really good at my players are going to come out of this year being really good at this stuff. And whether we win the Super Bowl or not, you're not going to fire me. You're not going to call for my job. We're going to be really good at this. And I think the problem right now is, like, we look on the defense, you see some players at positions stepping up. You certainly see, like, Devontae Wyatt's gotten better from last year. He's not great yet, but he's gotten a lot better from last year. You see why, okay, was he a first-round talent? You see the gradual improvement of different players. You see Darnell Savage, come in this year, play the safety position, and has had some, ups and downs, but you see net positive maybe from a season ago. So you see people improving, but what you don't necessarily see is, all right, if our commitment is to developing this young, talented team, I need to see on a week-to-week basis that they're getting better at winning their individual matchups. I don't know if that's the case. So that's how I would look. I would look at it as, yeah, certainly they're capable of getting to where you want to go as far as developing this team. But without that Brett Favre, without that Aaron Rodgers, and we don't know if Jordan Love's going to be that kind of player yet, do you have the program? Do you have the structure in place for the first time, if we're being honest, in a long time, that you have to draft and really develop these guys without the aid of a Hall of Fame quarterback, without the aid of a generational professional at the tight end, in the tight end room, without the aid of a veteran? David Bakhtiari is not on the field right now. Without, like, all of these things start adding up, without the aid of a Hall of Fame Davante Adams, preceded by Jordy, preceded by Donald, preceded by Free. You've had just legacy guys in these rooms, and when you don't have them for the first time, there is a big gap there. And I do think that's something that you have to at least acknowledge, I think, in those rooms when you're putting all this together. So those are our 5 questions. Hope that gave you something to chew on here for the next couple of days before we get into our Broncos preview. The Broncos have their own set of problems. Can't wait to talk about it, quite frankly, because I think it's been the last couple of years have been super interesting for Denver. Ownership over there has got to be going like, man, these bond checks that they're writing us for these TV contracts are awesome, but what do we get ourselves into? Happy to address a lot of that on Thursday. Make sure to hit me up with those questions. Michael68 on Twitter, Process to Perform on Instagram. Check if you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe, rate and review us on that YouTube channel, Process to Perform, youtube.com/Process to Perform. And then, certainly we're going to open at 1-point favorites on the road. I don't know how that's going to hold up over the week, but I will see you guys in 2 days from now. So enjoy the rest of the week. And again, hit me up with questions. We'll get them answered on the next show.